The ink-stained fingers of Benjamin Drake trembled as he sealed the first letter, wondering if the advertisement he had placed in the Boston Herald would bring anything more than silence and mockery to his lonely Wyoming ranch. It was February 1875, and the bitter wind howling across the prairie seemed to echo the emptiness that had settled into his bones after 3 years of building a life with no one to share it with. Benjamin was 26 years old, tall and lean from hard work, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of summer wheat. He had come west after the war, seeking distance from the memories that haunted him in Pennsylvania. The homestead outside of Ventura, Wyoming, had seemed like the perfect place to start fresh, and he had poured every ounce of his energy into making it prosper. His cattle thrived on the grasslands. His small cabin had grown into a proper ranch house with 3 bedrooms and a wide front porch, and his savings account at the Ventura Bank grew steadily each year. But at night, when the work was done and the silence pressed in from all sides, Benjamin felt the weight of his solitude like a physical ache. The advertisement had been a desperate measure, composed after too many whiskeys at the Silver Dollar Saloon and too many pitying looks from the married men in town. He had kept it simple, honest, because lies would help no one. He described himself, his ranch, his prospects, and what he hoped to find in a wife. A partner, a companion, someone who could see past the rough exterior to the dreams he still carried in his heart. 3 weeks later, the first response arrived. Benjamin stood in the Ventura post office, holding the cream-colored envelope as if it might vanish like morning mist. The handwriting was elegant, the letters formed with obvious care. His heart hammered against his ribs as he walked outside into the March sunshine and broke the seal. The letter was from Miss Eleanor Palmer of Boston, Massachusetts. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and living with her elderly aunt after the death of her parents 2 years prior. Her father had been a school teacher, and she had inherited his love of learning and books. She wrote that she was intrigued by his advertisement, not because she was desperate, but because she had always felt constrained by the narrow expectations of Boston society. The West represented freedom to her, a chance to build something meaningful rather than simply existing as an ornament in someone's parlor. Benjamin read the letter 3 times before he finally allowed himself to believe it was real. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with fresh paper and his best pen, composing a response that took him nearly 2 hours to complete. He told her about the ranch, about the way the mountains looked at sunset, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He told her about the challenges too, the harsh winters and the isolation, because he wanted her to understand what she would be choosing if she came west. Her second letter arrived in April, longer than the first. She asked questions about his daily life, about the town of Ventura, about what books he liked to read. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her work teaching children in her neighborhood, about her dreams of seeing the places she had only read about in books. Her words painted pictures in his mind, and he found himself thinking about her constantly as he worked. Benjamin's responses grew longer as well. He discovered that writing to her was unlike anything he had experienced before. With pen and paper between them, he could express thoughts and feelings that would have stuck in his throat in face-to-face conversation. He told her about losing his parents to fever when he was 14, about the war and the things he had seen, about the nightmares that had driven him west. He told her about his hope that the land could heal him, that building something good might balance out the destruction he had witnessed. Eleanor wrote back with understanding and compassion, never pitying, never judging. She told him about her own losses, about watching her parents waste away from consumption, about the helplessness she had felt. She told him about the way her aunt tried to arrange suitable marriages for her, introducing her to one boring banker or merchant after another, men who saw her as a potential housekeeper rather than a person with thoughts and dreams of her own. As spring turned to summer, their letters grew more frequent. Benjamin found himself rushing to the post office twice a week, and sometimes 3 times, hoping for another envelope with that familiar handwriting. He learned that Eleanor loved poetry, especially Wordsworth and Keats. He ordered books from the general store catalog and read them by lamplight so he could discuss them with her. She learned that he played the harmonica, taught by an old soldier during the war, and that music was one of the few things that could ease his troubled mind. In July, Eleanor sent him a photograph. Benjamin carried it to the window of the post office, hands shaking as he studied the image. She was beautiful, but not in the conventional way of the dance hall girls or the delicate society women he had seen in magazines. Her face was strong and intelligent, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to look directly into his soul even through the photograph. Her hair was light brown, pulled back in a simple style, and her expression was serious but with a hint of warmth around her mouth. He immediately went to the photographer in Ventura and had his own portrait made, though he felt ridiculous sitting still in his best clothes while the man fussed with his equipment. When he mailed it to Eleanor 2 weeks later, he included a letter confessing his nervousness about whether she would find him acceptable. Her response came faster than usual. She wrote that she had carried his photograph with her for an entire day before she could bring herself to look at it, afraid of being disappointed. But when she finally did, she wrote, she had seen strength and kindness in his face, and a sadness in his eyes that matched her own. She kept the photograph on her bedside table, she confessed, and sometimes found herself talking to it before she went to sleep. Benjamin's ranch hands noticed the change in him. He whistled while he worked, smiled more readily, and seemed to have an endless supply of energy. His foreman, an older man named Red who had worked cattle for 30 years, finally asked him directly what was going on. When Benjamin explained about the letters, Red clapped him on the shoulder and said it was about time he found someone to share his life with. By September, Benjamin and Eleanor had been corresponding for 7 months. The letters had evolved into something deeper than simple information exchange. They shared their fears and hopes, their daily triumphs and frustrations, their opinions on everything from politics to religion to the proper way to make coffee. Benjamin felt like he knew Eleanor better than he had known anyone in his life, and yet he had never heard her voice or felt her hand in his. It was in October that Benjamin finally gathered his courage and asked the question that had been building in him for months. He wrote that he believed he had fallen in love with her through their letters, improbable as that seemed. He wrote that he could offer her a good life, not an easy one perhaps, but one filled with purpose and partnership. He asked if she would consider coming to Ventura to marry him. For 2 weeks, he heard nothing. Benjamin went through his days in a fog of anxiety, second-guessing every word of that letter, wondering if he had moved too fast or expressed himself too strongly. He imagined her horror at his presumption, her relief at having discovered his true nature before traveling all that way. Then, on a Thursday morning in late October, the letter arrived. His hands shook so badly he could barely open it. Eleanor wrote that she had needed time to think, not because she doubted her feelings, but because she wanted to be certain she was making the decision for the right reasons. She had spent the 2 weeks examining her heart carefully. She wrote that she believed she loved him too, that his letters had become the brightest part of her days, that she dreamed of the life they could build together. She wrote that yes, she would come to Ventura. She would marry him. Benjamin stood in the middle of the post office and let out a whoop of joy that startled the postmaster and two elderly ladies sorting through their mail. He ran all the way back to his ranch, 5 miles of flat-out sprinting and walking when his lungs gave out, laughing like a madman the entire way. The next months were filled with planning. Eleanor needed time to settle her affairs in Boston, to say goodbye to her aunt and the few friends she was close to arrange for the journey west. They decided she would come in the spring, when the weather would be better for travel. Benjamin threw himself into preparing for her arrival. He hired a carpenter to add improvements to the house, including a real glass window for the kitchen and new floors throughout. He bought furniture from the catalog, agonizing over every choice. He painted the bedroom a soft blue because she had mentioned in a letter that it was her favorite color. In December, Eleanor wrote that her aunt had died peacefully in her sleep. Benjamin's heart ached for her, knowing that loss even at a distance. But Eleanor wrote that in a strange way it had brought her peace. Her aunt had given her blessing to the marriage before she passed, telling Eleanor that she deserved happiness and adventure, not the stifling life of a Boston spinster. The small inheritance her aunt left her would cover her travel expenses and leave enough for a few luxuries. The winter was long and hard, as Wyoming winters always were. Benjamin spent the dark evenings writing to Eleanor, sometimes 2 or 3 letters a week. He told her everything about the ranch, about his neighbors, about the town. He wanted her to feel like she was already part of his life, that when she arrived, she would be coming home rather than to a foreign place. Eleanor wrote back just as frequently. She told him about packing up her aunt's house, about distributing her belongings to friends and charity. She told him about buying practical clothes for her new life, studying books about ranching and the West, preparing herself as much as she could. She sent him a lock of her hair in January, tied with a blue ribbon. He kept it in his pocket, touching it sometimes just to remind himself that she was real. As March arrived and the snow began to melt, their letters took on a new urgency. Eleanor had booked her train journey for April 15th. She would travel from Boston to Chicago, then on to Cheyenne, arriving on April 21st if all went according to schedule. Benjamin would meet her at the station in Cheyenne, and they would be married there before making the journey back to Ventura. Benjamin could barely sleep as the date approached. He rode into Ventura 3 times in 1 week, checking with the telegraph office to see if there were any delays reported on the rail lines. He bought a new suit, his first ever, and paid the Chinese laundry woman extra to make sure it was perfect. He bought a ring from the jeweler, a simple gold band that cost him a month's profits but felt worth every penny. The night before he was to leave for Cheyenne, Benjamin sat on his porch and looked out at the land he had built his life on. In less than 2 days, he would meet the woman he loved, the woman who had filled his life with light and hope for the past year. He felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. What if the reality did not match the dream? What if she took one look at him and realized she had made a terrible mistake? But then he remembered her letters, hundreds of them now, each one a piece of her heart offered freely to him. She knew him, really knew him, in ways that face-to-face acquaintances never could. And he knew her. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days of hard riding. Benjamin left before dawn, his saddlebags packed with supplies and his best clothes wrapped carefully to keep them clean. The spring weather was cooperative, sunny and mild, as if the world itself was conspiring to make everything perfect. He arrived in Cheyenne on the afternoon of April 20th and took a room at a decent hotel. He spent the evening pacing, unable to eat, checking his pocket watch every few minutes as if that might make time move faster. He bathed twice, shaved carefully, and laid out his new suit with obsessive precision. April 21st dawned clear and beautiful. Benjamin was at the train station 2 hours before the scheduled arrival time, his stomach churning with nervous anticipation. He watched every train that pulled in, even though he knew hers was not due until 3 in the afternoon. At 2:45, the station master announced that the train from Chicago was running 15 minutes late. Benjamin thought he might lose his mind during that extra wait. He paced the platform, adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair, checked the ring in his pocket for the 100th time. Finally, he heard the whistle in the distance. The train appeared, growing larger as it approached, smoke billowing from its stack. Benjamin's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. The train screeched to a stop with a hiss of steam and the squeal of brakes. Passengers began to disembark, a steady stream of people. Benjamin scanned each face frantically, looking for the woman from the photograph, the woman whose words had become as essential to him as breathing. An elderly couple, a family with crying children, a group of businessmen, more and more people, but no Eleanor. Then she stepped down from the passenger car, one gloved hand holding the rail, and the entire world seemed to stop. The photograph had not done her justice. Eleanor was radiant in the afternoon sunlight, wearing a traveling dress of deep green that brought out the warmth in her brown hair. She was taller than he had imagined, nearly reaching his shoulder, with a grace in her movements that made his breath catch. But it was her face that held him transfixed. The intelligence and strength he had seen in the photograph were there, but animated now with life and emotion. Her eyes scanned the platform with a mixture of hope and nervousness that he recognized because he felt it too. Their eyes met across the crowded platform, and everything else fell away. Benjamin saw the moment she recognized him, saw her face transform with a smile that was like the sun breaking through clouds. He moved toward her without conscious thought, weaving through the crowd until he stood before her. For a moment, they just looked at each other, a year of letters and dreams suspended between them. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice softer than he had imagined but with a warmth that went straight to his heart. "Benjamin, Eleanor." Her name felt like a prayer on his lips. "You came." "I said I would," she smiled, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "You are exactly as I pictured you." "You are more," he said honestly. "So much more." She laughed, a sound like music, and reached out to touch his hand. Even through their gloves, he felt the contact like electricity. They stood there, holding hands on the crowded platform while the world rushed by around them, just looking at each other, making real what had lived only in words and imagination. "I have a room at a hotel," Benjamin finally said, then flushed as he realized how that sounded. "I mean, I have a room, you can have it. I'll find somewhere else to stay until we're married." Eleanor's smile widened. "I trust you, Benjamin. Your letters have shown me your character." He helped her collect her trunks, 3 of them, each carefully labeled in her neat handwriting. A porter helped them load everything onto a wagon Benjamin had hired for the purpose. As they rode through the streets of Cheyenne toward the hotel, Eleanor looked around with obvious interest, taking in the busy city with its mixture of elegant buildings and rougher establishments. "It is so different from Boston," she said. "So much sky. I had forgotten how big the sky could be." "Wait until you see Wyoming," Benjamin said. "Cheyenne seems cramped compared to the open range." At the hotel, Benjamin secured a second room for himself, down the hall from Eleanor's. He helped her carry her trunks upstairs, then stood awkwardly in the doorway, suddenly unsure what to do next. Eleanor set down her bag and turned to face him. "Benjamin, I know this is strange. We know each other so well in one way and not at all in another, but I meant what I wrote in my letters." I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. The certainty in her voice steadied him. I want that too, more than I have ever wanted anything. Then let us not wait. Can we be married tomorrow? Benjamin felt relief wash over him. I have already arranged it. The minister at the Methodist church has agreed to perform the ceremony at 10 in the morning, if that suits you. It suits me perfectly. They had dinner together that evening in the hotel dining room, a strange and wonderful experience after a year of one-sided communication. Benjamin discovered that Eleanor's laugh was infectious, that she had a quick wit and was not afraid to tease him gently. Eleanor discovered that Benjamin was quieter in person than in his letters, but that when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and sincere. They talked until the dining room closed, and the waiters were obviously waiting for them to leave. Even then, they lingered in the hotel lobby, neither wanting the evening to end. Finally, propriety demanded they retire to their separate rooms, but not before Benjamin took both of Eleanor's hands in his and told her he could not believe his good fortune. I kept thinking something would go wrong, he confessed. That the train would be delayed, or you would change your mind, or I would wake up and find it was all a dream. Eleanor squeezed his hands. I am real, Benjamin, and I am here, and tomorrow I will be your wife. That night, Benjamin lay awake in his hotel room, simultaneously exhausted and too excited to sleep. Tomorrow he would marry Eleanor Palmer, the woman who had captured his heart with nothing but words on paper. It seemed impossible, miraculous, that something so good could come into his life. The next morning dawned cloudy but warm, with a soft breeze that carried the promise of rain. Benjamin dressed carefully in his new suit, his hands steadier than he expected. He had been more nervous before minor cattle sales than he was now, facing the most important moment of his life. But something about Eleanor's presence had calmed the constant anxiety that usually hummed beneath his surface. She was here, she was real, and she wanted this as much as he did. He knocked on her door at 9:30, and when she opened it, his breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, with her hair arranged in soft curls around her face. She carried a small bouquet of flowers she must have purchased from the hotel's florist. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She blushed, which made her even lovelier. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They walked together to the church, a small wooden building on a quiet street. The minister, Reverend Thompson, was a kind-faced man in his 50s who had performed the ceremony for many mail-order marriages. His wife served as witness, along with the church organist. The ceremony was simple and brief, but to Benjamin, every word felt weighted with meaning. When he slipped the gold band onto Eleanor's finger, his hand trembled slightly. When she looked up at him and repeated her vows in a clear, steady voice, he felt something settle into place in his chest, like a piece of himself he had not known was missing had finally been found. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. Benjamin cupped Eleanor's face gently in his hands, marveling that he was allowed to touch her, that she was his wife. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a seal on the promises they had made. When they parted, Eleanor's eyes were shining with tears, and Benjamin knew his own were as well. They signed the marriage certificate in the church office, making it official. Eleanor Drake, she wrote in her careful script, and Benjamin watched the formation of each letter with a sense of wonder. She was his wife. After a year of hoping and dreaming, she was truly his. They had lunch at a nice restaurant in Cheyenne, then spent the afternoon walking through the city. Eleanor wanted to see everything: store windows and busy streets, the Grand Opera House and the Capitol building. Benjamin was content to follow her, watching her delight in each new sight. He bought her candy from a confectioner and a book of poetry from a bookstore, small gifts to mark the day. As evening approached, they returned to the hotel. Benjamin had given up his separate room that morning, moving his few belongings into Eleanor's room. Their room now, he corrected himself. The thought made his heart race. They climbed the stairs together, and Benjamin unlocked the door with hands that had started to shake again. Inside, the room seemed smaller than it had before, the large bed dominating the space in a way he had not noticed earlier. Eleanor set down her flowers and turned to face him. In the lamplight, her face was soft and open, but he could see nervousness in her eyes that matched his own. "I must confess something," she said quietly. "I have never been with a man before. I know that is probably obvious, but I want to say it aloud. I do not know what I am doing." Benjamin crossed to her and took her hands. "Neither do I, not really, but we have time to figure it out together. There is no rush, Eleanor. We have the rest of our lives." She smiled at that, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Your letters always made me feel safe. I am glad to know that the man matches the words." "Always," he promised. "You will always be safe with me." They took their time that night, learning each other slowly, gently, with patience and care. Benjamin discovered that Eleanor had a spattering of freckles across her shoulders that made him smile. Eleanor discovered that Benjamin had scars from the war that he touched sometimes without realizing it. They learned each other's bodies and each other's hearts, and when they finally came together, it felt like the natural continuation of a conversation that had begun a year ago with pen and paper. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor's head on Benjamin's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, pattering against the window in a soothing rhythm. "Are you happy?" Benjamin asked softly. "More than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor replied. "Are you?" "Yes." The simple word could not capture the fullness in his chest, the sense of rightness that permeated everything. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Thank you for being brave enough to place that advertisement. Think of what we would have missed if you had not." They stayed in Cheyenne for 3 more days, exploring the city and simply enjoying being together without the delay and distance of letters. But both of them were eager to begin their real life, and on the 5th day of their marriage, they set out for Ventura. They had purchased a wagon for the journey, loaded with Eleanor's trunks and supplies for the ranch. Benjamin had also bought a gentle mare for Eleanor to ride when she preferred that to the wagon. The journey would take 3 days, camping along the way, and Benjamin was almost looking forward to it. Time alone with Eleanor, away from the bustle of the city, felt like a gift. The weather cooperated beautifully, spring sunshine and mild temperatures perfect for travel. As they left Cheyenne behind and the landscape opened up before them, Benjamin watched Eleanor's face light up with wonder. The rolling grasslands stretched to the horizon in every direction, broken only by occasional rock formations and the distant line of mountains. "It is so vast," Eleanor breathed. "The pictures in books do not do it justice." "Wait until you see the ranch," Benjamin said. The view from the porch looked straight toward the mountains. At sunset, they turned purple and gold. They made good progress that first day, and when they stopped to make camp in the evening, Eleanor insisted on helping with everything. She gathered firewood, helped unsaddle the horses, and attempted to cook their dinner over the open fire. The beans were slightly burned and the coffee was too strong, but Benjamin ate every bite and declared it the best meal he had ever had. That night, they spread their bedrolls under the stars, and Benjamin pointed out constellations while Eleanor lay beside him. The vastness of the sky felt less lonely with her there to share it. Tell me about the ranch, Eleanor said. Not the facts from your letters, but how it feels to you. What you love about it. Benjamin was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. It feels like freedom, he finally said. Like possibility. When I came west after the war, I was broken. The things I had seen, the things I had done, they haunted me. But out here, I found space to heal. I found work that mattered, that built things instead of destroying them. The ranch is proof that I can create something good, that I am more than what the war made me. Eleanor reached for his hand in the darkness. You are so much more than that. Your letters showed me a man of depth and kindness, someone who thinks deeply and feels deeply. That is who you are, Benjamin, not what you did during the war. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You make me believe that. The second day of travel brought them through rolling hills and past several small homesteads. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat lunch in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Eleanor had brought bread and cheese from Cheyenne, and they made a simple but satisfying meal. Tell me about the people in Ventura, Eleanor said as they ate. Who will I meet? Who are your friends? Benjamin described the town and its inhabitants. There was Red, his foreman, who had been working cattle since before Benjamin was born and had taught him everything he knew about ranching. There was Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house and made the best pies in Wyoming. There was Doc Martin, who had served as a field surgeon during the war and understood things without needing to talk about them. There was the postmaster, Mr. Jenkins, who had been the keeper of their letters for the past year. Mr. Jenkins is probably the most excited to meet you, Benjamin said with a smile. He watched me come in week after week, looking for your letters. He used to joke that he felt like he knew you too, Eleanor laughed. I hope I live up to expectations. You exceed them, Benjamin said seriously, in every way. That evening, they camped beside a small stream, and Eleanor took the opportunity to wash some of the trail dust from her face and hands. She had changed from her traveling dress into more practical clothes, a simple blouse and skirt that she could move in more easily. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, curling around her face in the humidity. Benjamin thought she had never looked more beautiful. After dinner, they sat together by the fire, Eleanor leaning against Benjamin's chest as he wrapped his arms around her. The night sounds of the prairie surrounded them, crickets and the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through grass. Are you nervous about meeting everyone? Benjamin asked. A little, Eleanor admitted. I want them to like me. I want to fit into your life, not disrupt it. You could never disrupt it. You make it better just by being in it. He kissed the top of her head. And they will love you. How could they not? The third day brought them into familiar territory for Benjamin. He pointed out landmarks, the strange rock formation that looked like a sitting bear, the old oak tree where he had sheltered during his first Wyoming thunderstorm, the hill where he always stopped to look at the view of his ranch spread out below. When they crested that hill in the late afternoon, Benjamin reined in the horses and turned to watch Eleanor's face. The ranch lay below them in a gentle valley, the house and barn surrounded by grazing cattle, backed by the magnificent sweep of the mountains in the distance. Eleanor's expression was everything he had hoped for. Wonder and joy mingled on her face as she took in the sight of what would be her new home. "Oh, Benjamin," she whispered, "it is perfect." They descended the hill slowly, and as they approached the house, Benjamin saw Red and two of the other hands come out to meet them. Red pulled off his hat as they drew near, his weathered face creasing in a broad smile. "Mrs. Drake, I presume," he said, his voice warm with welcome. "Benjamin has talked of nothing but you for months. It is a pleasure to finally meet you." Eleanor returned his smile. "Please call me Eleanor, and thank you. Benjamin has written so much about you in his letters. I feel I already know you." The other hands introduced themselves, both younger men who looked at Eleanor with obvious admiration and at Benjamin with barely concealed envy. They helped unload the wagon, carrying Eleanor's trunks into the house while Benjamin gave her a tour of the property. She exclaimed over everything: the solid construction of the barn, the well-tended vegetable garden that Benjamin had planted but admitted he had no skill with, the chickens pecking in their yard, the view from the porch that was every bit as beautiful as he had described. Inside the house, Benjamin watched nervously as Eleanor examined each room. He had done his best to make it welcoming, but it was still a rough ranch house, nothing like what she would have been accustomed to in Boston. But Eleanor seemed genuinely delighted with everything. She loved the spacious kitchen with its new window, the comfortable sitting room with the fireplace, the bedroom he had painted blue just for her. "You did this for me?" she asked, touching the wall gently. "You said it was your favorite color." She turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Benjamin Drake, you are going to make me cry every day if you keep being so thoughtful." He pulled her into his arms. "I want you to be happy here. I want this to feel like home." "It already does," she said against his chest, "because you are here." They spent the evening settling Eleanor's belongings, unpacking her trunks and finding places for everything. Eleanor had brought books, dozens of them, and they arranged them on the shelves Benjamin had built in the sitting room. She had brought small decorative items, pictures and a lovely quilt her aunt had made, things that immediately made the house feel more like a home. She had brought practical items too, good kitchen equipment and sewing supplies, ready to contribute to the running of the household. That night, in their bedroom with the door closed against the world, they made love slowly and tenderly, celebrating the beginning of their life together in their own home. Afterward, Benjamin lay awake long after Eleanor had fallen asleep, listening to her soft breathing, still hardly believing that this was real, that she was here in his bed, in his house, in his life, that all the loneliness of the past years had led to this moment of perfect happiness. The next morning, Benjamin woke to the smell of coffee and something baking. He dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to find Eleanor already up, wearing an apron over her dress, pulling a pan of biscuits from the oven. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I hope you do not mind. I wanted to start learning my way around the kitchen. These might not be very good. I am still getting used to your oven." Benjamin tasted one of the biscuits and declared it delicious, which made her laugh because they both knew it was slightly overdone. But they ate breakfast together in their kitchen, in their house, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into ranch life with a determination and grace that amazed Benjamin. She insisted on learning everything, from cooking on the wood stove to tending the vegetable garden to feeding the chickens. She had moments of frustration, like when she accidentally let the chickens out and they had to chase them all over the yard, or when her first attempt at laundry left Benjamin's shirts an interesting shade of pink. But she laughed at her mistakes and kept trying, refusing to be defeated by the learning curve. Benjamin took her riding most afternoons, teaching her more about the ranch and the surrounding territory. Eleanor proved to be a natural horsewoman, confident and capable in the saddle. They explored together, and Benjamin showed her all his favorite places: the meadow full of wildflowers, the creek where he fished, the high point where you could see for miles in every direction. In May, they took the wagon into Ventura so Benjamin could introduce Eleanor to the town. Main Street was bustling with activity, ranchers and farmers coming in for supplies, families doing their weekly shopping. Benjamin felt proud walking down the street with Eleanor on his arm, and he saw the appreciative looks she drew from everyone they passed. Mr. Jenkins at the post office was the first to greet them, pumping Eleanor's hand enthusiastically and declaring that it was wonderful to put a face to the name he had seen on so many envelopes. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house invited them for lunch and spent the entire meal quizzing Eleanor about Boston and exclaiming over how brave she was to come all this way. Doc Martin tipped his hat and welcomed her to town with his quiet dignity. The ladies of Ventura, particularly the wives of the other ranchers, were initially a bit reserved with Eleanor. She was educated, well-spoken, and clearly from a different background than most of them. But Eleanor won them over with her genuine interest in their lives and her willingness to admit what she did not know. When Mrs. Carter, the wife of the largest rancher in the area, mentioned her quilting circle, Eleanor asked if she might join, confessing that she had never learned to quilt but had always wanted to. "A Boston lady wanting to learn quilting," Mrs. Carter said with surprise. "A Wyoming ranch wife wanting to learn a useful skill," Eleanor corrected gently. "I have so much to learn about life here. I would appreciate any guidance you ladies could offer." The warmth in the response to that statement was immediate. By the time they left Ventura that afternoon, Eleanor had been invited to the quilting circle, to a church social, and to have tea with 3 different families. "You were wonderful," Benjamin told her as they drove home. "You charmed every single person." "They are good people," Eleanor said. "I like them. This place feels welcoming in a way Boston never did. There I was always being judged, always found wanting in some way. Here, people seem willing to accept me as I am." As spring turned to summer, Benjamin watched Eleanor blossom in her new life. The constant activity of ranch work agreed with her, and she grew stronger and more confident with each passing week. She took over the vegetable garden entirely, coaxing an impressive array of vegetables from the Wyoming soil. She learned to cook the hearty meals that the ranch hands needed, and her biscuits improved dramatically. She made friends with the women in town and proved to have a natural gift for nursing, helping Doc Martin with several cases and earning his respect for her calm competence. But it was the quiet moments Benjamin treasured most. Evenings on the porch after the work was done, Eleanor reading aloud while Benjamin played his harmonica. Sunday mornings sleeping late and making love in the golden sunlight that streamed through their bedroom window. Riding out together to check on the cattle, Eleanor's laughter as she raced him across an open meadow. In August, Eleanor began teaching lessons in Ventura, working with children who lived too far from any established school. She set up a small classroom in the Methodist church and spent 3 afternoons a week teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Benjamin could see how much joy it brought her, using the skills she had developed in Boston to help the children of Wyoming. One evening in September, Benjamin was working on the ranch accounts when Eleanor came into his office and sat down across from him. He looked up from his ledger to find her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is wonderful," she said. "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made his heart skip. "What is it?" "I am with child," Eleanor said softly. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Benjamin stared at her for a long moment, the words not quite making sense. Then the meaning crashed over him like a wave and he was on his feet, pulling her up into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby." His voice came out strangled. "Eleanor, truly, truly." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. Doc Martin confirmed it this afternoon." Benjamin set her down gently, suddenly afraid of holding her too tightly. "Are you all right? Is everything as it should be?" "Everything is perfect. Doc Martin says I am healthy and strong, and there is no reason to expect any complications." She took his face in her hands. "We are going to be parents, Benjamin. Our family is growing." That night they lay in bed talking about the future in a new way. Names for the baby, whether it might be a boy or a girl, how they would arrange the second bedroom as a nursery. Benjamin found himself terrified and elated in equal measure. The thought of being responsible for a child, of possibly failing this new life, was overwhelming. But Eleanor's calm confidence steadied him, as it always did. "You will be a wonderful father," she told him. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our child will be so lucky to have you." "I hope I can be what they need," Benjamin said, his hand resting gently on Eleanor's still flat stomach. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a family. I thought I was too damaged, too broken from the war." "You are not broken," Eleanor said firmly. "You were hurt and you healed. That is not the same thing, and now we get to build something beautiful together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Eleanor continued her teaching until December, when the snows made regular travel difficult, and her expanding belly made the long hours standing too tiring. She spent the winter months sewing clothes for the baby and rearranging the house to accommodate their growing family. Benjamin fussed over her constantly, earning gentle teasing from Eleanor and outright laughter from Red, who had seen enough pregnant women in his time to know that Eleanor was perfectly healthy. In February, exactly 2 years after Benjamin had placed his advertisement in the Boston Herald, Eleanor went into labor on a snowy morning. Benjamin rode through a blizzard to fetch Doc Martin, his heart in his throat with fear. By the time they returned, Eleanor was in the bedroom with Mrs. Henderson, who had been staying with them for the last week in anticipation of the birth. The labor was long and difficult. Benjamin paced the sitting room for hours, listening to Eleanor's cries and feeling helpless. Red and the other hands cleared out to the barn, giving the family privacy, but Benjamin could see them through the window, waiting anxiously for news. Finally, as the sun was setting and the snow was starting to clear, Benjamin heard a new sound, a baby crying, strong and lusty. He stood frozen, afraid to hope, until Mrs. Henderson opened the bedroom door with a broad smile. "You have a son, Benjamin, a healthy, beautiful baby boy, and Eleanor is doing fine." Benjamin pushed past her into the bedroom. Eleanor lay propped up on pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling radiantly. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket Eleanor had embroidered, was the tiniest person Benjamin had ever seen. His son. "Come meet him," Eleanor said softly. Benjamin approached slowly, his legs feeling weak. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son's face. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes. He had Eleanor's nose and a surprising amount of dark hair. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered. "Eleanor, he is absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" With trembling hands, Benjamin took his son into his arms. The baby was so light, so fragile, and yet Benjamin could feel the strength in his tiny body. This was his child, his and Eleanor's, a new life they had created together. "What shall we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Looking down at his son, Benjamin suddenly knew. "Thomas," he said. "After your father, Thomas Drake." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "My father would have been so honored. Thomas Drake, it is perfect." Over the next weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up many nights with his demands to be fed. Eleanor navigated new motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else, and Benjamin discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed. There was something miraculous about holding his son in the middle of the night, walking the floor to soothe him, watching the tiny face relax into sleep. Red and the ranch hands were utterly charmed by the baby. these rough cowboys who transformed into gentle giants around Thomas. They made him toys, carved from wood with surprising skill. Mrs. Henderson knitted enough baby clothes to last through several winters. The ladies of Ventura showered them with gifts and advice, welcomed baby Thomas into the community with open arms. As winter gave way to spring, Benjamin often found himself stopping in the middle of his work to simply marvel at what his life had become. 2 years ago, he had been alone, haunted by his past, wondering if he would ever find peace or happiness. Now he had Eleanor, the love of his life, the woman who had taken a chance on a stranger's letter. Now he had Thomas, his son, the future embodied in one small, perfect person. Now he had a home, not just a house but a real home, filled with love and laughter. One evening in April, Benjamin sat on the porch with Eleanor beside him, Thomas sleeping in her arms. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, just as he had described in his letters so long ago. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked. "About how lucky I am," Benjamin said honestly. "About how one letter, one chance I took, brought me everything I ever wanted." Eleanor reached over and took his hand. "Do you remember what you wrote in your first letter to me? You said you were looking for a partner, someone to build a life with." "I remember every word of every letter I wrote to you. You told me about your dreams, about the kind of life you hope to create. And Benjamin, look at what we have built. This is more beautiful than any dream." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were braver than I was. You gave up everything you knew to come here, to come to me. I gave up a life that was slowly suffocating me and gained one full of possibility and love. That was not bravery, that was survival." She smiled at him, the smile that still made his heart skip after 2 years of seeing it every day. "You saved me as much as I saved you, Benjamin Drake." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Benjamin thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The loneliness that had driven him to place that advertisement. The courage it had taken for Eleanor to respond. The year of letters that had built a foundation stronger than any they could have created in person. The leap of faith they had both taken in committing to a stranger. It had all been worth it. Every moment of uncertainty, every fear, every risk. Because it had led to this, to Eleanor and Thomas, to a life richer and fuller than he had ever imagined possible. Thomas stirred in Eleanor's arms, making a small sound before settling back to sleep. Eleanor looked down at him with such love that Benjamin felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I want more," Eleanor said softly, surprising him. "More what? More children. More of these moments. More of this life we are building together." She looked up at him. "I want to fill this house with children and laughter. I want to grow old with you on this porch, watching the sunset. I want everything, Benjamin, all of it." "Then we will have it," he promised. "All of it. Everything your heart desires." And they did. Over the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter came 2 years after Thomas, a spirited little girl they named Catherine, who had Eleanor's intelligence and Benjamin's determination. Another son followed 3 years later, James, who was gentle and thoughtful from birth. The ranch prospered under Benjamin's careful management, expanding steadily until it was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Eleanor continued teaching, her little school in Ventura growing until the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the official teacher. She became a pillar of the community, respected and loved for her compassion and wisdom. She never lost her love of learning, ordering books constantly from catalogs, turning their sitting room into a library that was the envy of the territory. Benjamin found that fatherhood suited him in ways he had never expected. He loved teaching his children about the ranch, about the land, about the values he held dear. The nightmares that had once plagued him faded as the years passed, replaced by dreams of his family's future. The restlessness that had driven him west transformed into a deep contentment with the life he had built. Red worked for them until he was too old to sit a horse anymore, at which point he moved into the small cabin Benjamin built for him on the property, spending his days teaching the grandchildren about cattle and telling stories of the old days. Mrs. Henderson became like a grandmother to their children, and Doc Martin was a regular visitor, bringing peppermints for the kids and good whiskey for Benjamin. Through it all, the foundation of everything was Benjamin and Eleanor's love for each other, that strange and wonderful connection that had begun with words on paper and grown into something deep and unshakable. They still wrote each other letters sometimes, leaving notes for each other around the house, silly messages or heartfelt expressions of love. It was their private joke, their connection to where they had started. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Benjamin sat Eleanor down in the sitting room after the children were in bed and handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find every letter she had ever written him, carefully preserved and tied with ribbon, along with copies of every letter he had written her that she had also saved. "Our story," Benjamin said, "from the very beginning." Eleanor traced the familiar handwriting on the top envelope, tears streaming down her face. "We should give these to the children someday, so they can understand how their parents found each other. So they can believe in taking chances," Benjamin agreed. "In trusting their hearts, even when it seems crazy." That night, they stayed up late reading their letters to each other, laughing at their younger selves' uncertainty and formality, marveling at how clearly their love had shone through even in those early, careful words. They had been so worried about saying the right thing, about revealing too much or not enough. But every word had been perfect because every word had been honest. As Eleanor fell asleep in his arms that night, Benjamin reflected on the question she had asked him years ago. Was he happy? The answer was so much bigger than yes. He was content, fulfilled, at peace in ways he had never imagined possible. The broken soldier who had placed a desperate advertisement in a Boston newspaper had been healed, not by time or distance, but by love. Eleanor had been everything he dreamed of and so much more. She had brought light into his darkness, hope into his despair, laughter into his silence. She had given him children and a true home, and a reason to believe in the goodness of life. And he hoped, he believed, that he had given her something equally valuable in return. Freedom, purpose, a love that celebrated who she was rather than trying to reshape her into something more acceptable. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. A family, a legacy, a love story that would outlive them both in the memories of their children and grandchildren. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. They weathered droughts and hard winters, lost friends to age and illness, saw their children grow up and start families of their own. Thomas took over running the ranch, proving to have inherited his father's skill and his mother's intelligence. Catherine became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over the Ventura School. James became a lawyer, the first in the family to attend university, but he always came home to Wyoming because home was where his heart lived. Benjamin and Eleanor grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in impossible colors. They still held hands when they walked. They still found ways to make each other laugh. When Benjamin was 73 years old, he suffered a stroke that left him weakened and bedridden. Eleanor nursed him with the same patience and tenderness she had shown in everything else, reading to him, sitting with him, making sure he was comfortable. Their children visited constantly, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren to brighten his days. One evening in late spring, with the window open to let in the sweet air and the sound of birds singing outside, Benjamin looked at Eleanor sitting beside his bed and felt such a surge of love that it almost hurt. "You remember the first time we saw each other?" he asked, his voice thin but clear. At the train station in Cheyenne, Eleanor smiled, taking his hand in both of hers. "I remember thinking you were even more handsome than your photograph. I remember being so nervous I thought I might faint. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I still think that." "You are a foolish old man," Eleanor said, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I am a lucky old man, lucky beyond measure." Benjamin squeezed her hand weakly. "Thank you for answering my letter, Eleanor. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for writing it." Eleanor leaned forward and kissed his forehead gently. "Thank you for giving me this life, for giving me you." Benjamin passed away that night peacefully with Eleanor holding his hand and their children gathered around. He slipped away on a breath, leaving behind a legacy of love and family, and a ranch that would carry the Drake name for generations. Eleanor lived for 5 more years after Benjamin's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still teaching occasionally, still reading voraciously, still vital and engaged with life. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Benjamin, that she was waiting patiently to be reunited with him. When her time came, on a beautiful September morning much like the one when their son had been born so many years before, Eleanor went peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates that bracketed their lives. But the real memorial to their love was not in stone. It was in the children they had raised, who went on to raise good children of their own. It was in the ranch that continued to thrive, operated with the values Benjamin and Eleanor had instilled. It was in the school in Ventura that still bore Eleanor's influence decades after she stopped teaching. It was in the letters, carefully preserved and passed down through the generations, a testament to 2 people who had the courage to reach across the distance and build a love that lasted a lifetime. Years later, Thomas's granddaughter found those letters in the attic, tied with faded ribbon, and spent an entire afternoon reading them. She was amazed by the story they told, by the faith and courage her great-grandparents had shown. She brought them to her own grandmother, Catherine, who had heard the story many times but never tired of it. "They really fell in love through letters?" the granddaughter asked, marveling at the idea in an age when such things seemed impossible. Catherine smiled, remembering her parents as they had been when she was young, so clearly devoted to each other, their love a tangible presence in every room they entered. "They fell in love through words," she corrected. "Through honesty and vulnerability and the willingness to truly see each other. The letters were just the means. The love was always going to happen one way or another." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard." "It was romantic," Catherine agreed. "But it was also real and hard and required work every single day. They chose each other every morning, not just once at a train station in Cheyenne. That is what made it last." She carefully retied the ribbon around the letters and handed them back to her granddaughter. "Keep these safe. They are part of our history, our family's story. They remind us that love is worth the risk, that reaching out to another person, even when you are afraid, can change everything." The granddaughter held the letters carefully, feeling the weight of the history they contained. She thought about her great-grandfather, the lonely cowboy who had taken a chance. She thought about her great-grandmother, the Boston woman who had been brave enough to say yes. She thought about the life they had built together, the love that had sustained them through decades, the legacy they had left behind. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth believing in. It was a story that said love could overcome distance and difference, that two strangers could become the most important people in each other's lives, that happy endings were possible if you were brave enough to pursue them. It was a story that began with a letter and ended with a lifetime of love. And it was all true, every beautiful, improbable, wonderful word of it. The ranch still stood on that hill in Ventura, Wyoming, still with the view of the mountains that Benjamin had described in his first letters to Eleanor. The house had been expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remained, the bones of the home that Benjamin had prepared for his bride. The porch where they had sat together countless evenings was still there, still offering the same breathtaking sunsets. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, it almost seemed like you could feel them there still. Benjamin and Eleanor Drake, the cowboy and his mail-order bride, together for eternity in the place where their love had grown and flourished. Two people who had proven that the greatest adventures sometimes begin with a single act of courage, a letter sent into the unknown, answered by someone who was exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed them most. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, sustained by faith and commitment, and concluded only when death parted them. And even then, their love lived on in the lives they had touched, and the family they had created, an enduring testament to what two people can build when they choose each other with open hearts and unwavering dedication. Benjamin and Eleanor Drake had written their own story, one letter at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. And in doing so, they had created something immortal. Not fame or fortune or worldly success, but something far more valuable. They had created a love that transcended time, a family that carried their values forward, a story that would inspire generations yet to come. That was their legacy. That was their triumph. And that was the ending they deserved, the ending they had earned through all the years of love and partnership and devotion. Together forever in life and beyond, two souls perfectly matched, perfectly united, perfectly at peace. Their story, which had begun with uncertainty and hope in equal measure, had become something beautiful and lasting. It proved that taking a chance on love, even when logic suggested otherwise, could lead to the greatest rewards. It proved that the strongest foundations are sometimes built on nothing more substantial than words and faith and the willingness to believe in possibility. Benjamin Drake had written letters for a year, pouring his heart onto the page, offering himself honestly to a woman he had never met. Eleanor Palmer had responded with equal honesty, equal courage, seeing in his words the man he truly was, and choosing to build a life with him. When she arrived in Cheyenne on that April day, she had been everything he dreamed of and more. And he had been everything she needed, everything she had hoped to find. Together, they had lived a life full of love, raised a family, built something lasting. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had grown old together, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. And when their time came, they had left behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a perfect ending to a perfect love story. And it all began with a lonely cowboy, a pen, and the courage to hope for something better. That hope had been answered beyond his wildest dreams, and the answer had been Eleanor. Always Eleanor, his love, his partner, his heart. The woman who had traveled across a continent to marry a stranger and had found, instead, her home.